On today's episode, I'll be talking about carbohydrate metabolism as well as some myths around carbs and why they are absolutely not the devil and how to utilize them within your diet for fat loss and also muscle growth.
Welcome to the Break Through the Bullshit podcast. I am your host, Alice Round. I am pumped to have you here. We are going to really strip back all of the bullshit surrounding nutrition, training, fad diets, everything in the industry so that we can give you education to get the best possible results. So sit back, enjoy the ride, and let's go through all this bullshit.
Welcome back to another episode, guys. Thanks for being here and welcome to, I think we are I think we're at the 11th episode now, which is awesome. It's just been crazy trying to pump out content over the last few weeks. I've really been enjoying the process. The response has been great. So thank you anyone that has sent me a message. I've had Snapchats, I've had Instagram messages, Facebook, emails. It's been awesome. And, you know, it's a little bit intimidating, you know, putting your thoughts out there and, you know, your research and everything like that just out there on a platform like this where you can be judged, you can be criticized, you can be ridiculed, all of those things, and you're just putting your thoughts and emotions out there, as well as obviously my science background coming into it too. But even though we're talking about carbs today, I'm going to talk just a tiny bit about internet trolls as well. I'm sure I'll do many episodes on this topic. But, you know, it happens all the time. I don't get it too severely, but I have had a few repeat offenders. And I think that people forget that you're putting yourself out there and you're taking that risk in doing something like this or a YouTube channel or whatever it is. And then to have someone come down on you and pick on such minute details, such tiny things that you might say, and you might slip up in the moment and maybe what you said didn't come across 100% right. Generally, the things that I do and say are raw and real, and I don't tend to go back and edit things for that reason. But then at some times I'll probably slip up. We're all going to make mistakes, and if we're constantly trying to be perfect, we will honestly get nothing done. And I've learned that over the last few years. You know, I've had people come down on me about maybe like a spelling error or whatever it is, and for me it's just like, Jesus, do you not have better things to do with your time than pick me up on the spelling of there and there? And it's just beyond crazy for me that people would actually be in that headspace where they're like, I'm going to go on a Saturday night and sit on Facebook and go and write negative comments on someone's post when I know that they're just doing this post to genuinely help people and they're a genuine person. So that's really upsetting when you see people do things like that, especially people you know. And I mean, I say upsetting, but to be honest, it doesn't really upset me these days. Sometimes, you know, if it's maybe someone I respect, but to be honest, at the end of the day, if I don't respect someone else's opinion, or I don't respect maybe what they're doing with their life, then it makes it hard for their impact to really affect me, their comments to affect me. So you just have to be really strong in that sense. If you're going to put yourself out there, which I do, and I want to be, you know, an authority for, you know, females and empowerment, and by having someone internet troll you, they're really not empowering themselves. And the funniest thing is, it's generally guys that do it to me. I don't often get females tearing me down. It's normally guys. So boys, come say it to me. I'd love to have a chat. So yeah, it's a hard situation. But again, I've got friends in the industry that have far bigger followings than me and get it on a daily basis. And it's really hard to see, and for their family to see, and parents to see, and partners, that they're getting these internet bullies. And I just think, like, don't people think about stuff like that? Like, their family has to see this comment, or their friends have to see this comment just because it's on social media, and you know that's actually their real life. They're not just putting some fake photo up, or sometimes people will, but generally speaking, that's their real life. And if they're putting up, I've seen it before, some of my girlfriends that have big followings, they'll put up a photo of them and their partner, and people will say that their partner's ugly and start commenting on all over it. And can you imagine how their partner feels? This is why some girls don't post photos of their partners if they're models or whatever it is, that their partner's going to get ridiculed and, you know, people are going to be horrible to them. So I just don't get internet trolls, and I always look at it from this sense. If you've got time to go and internet troll my posts, then you're probably not doing, you know, that productively in your life at the moment. So I think you kind of may need to reflect on what's going on with your own job, business, happiness, all of that, if you're having to go and take the time to write negative posts. And didn't your mum ever tell you, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say it at all? That is my motto. All right. So getting into it, carbohydrates, all right, or carbs or CHO, you'll see all these terms shorthanded when you're looking up articles, all of these sort of things on the internet. Now, I think there's a few myths that we're going to bust surrounding carbs. I feel like it's a topic that always comes up. I feel like I've done it in videos before, in articles, but I still get the same questions. So there's obviously still some confusion around carbohydrates. All right, number one, carbs do not make you fat. That is a very simple one to run off. Now, carbohydrates, even when you're in a deficit, play a significant role within the body. So carbohydrates are obviously mainly in muscle glycogen when they're broken down. That's one of your main storage points. So obviously your other storage point is, fat deposits. So basically when carbohydrates are broken down, they're going to basically go through the whole chewing digestion process. There's going to be some chemical digestion within the stomach. Then you're going to have mechanical digestion. So that's going to more go down to your liver, and then you're going to have bile play a role in chemical digestion. Then we're going to have absorption of lipid-soluble substances, so that obviously doesn't come into play with carbohydrates. There's nothing in there we have to worry about. And then mechanical digestion is generally like mixing and propulsion, segmentational. And then we generally will have absorption of glucose. So carbs are obviously broken down to glucose, and then those glucose go into the bloodstream, and then they are going to specific places within the body. Generally, fat deposits a little bit in the liver and then in your muscles. So that is basically ultra simplified, carbs being broken down. I mean, we could go into that in a lot more detail, but I'm just telling you simple sense. They're going to be broken down to glucose. So then from glucose in the bloodstream, if they are not utilized from there, they're going to then get converted to glycogen. And then that's obviously your storage form, and that's going to be in, like I said, muscles, liver, all of that. So carbohydrates, really simply put, are going to be broken down, digested and absorbed, processed in the liver, and then from the liver, we're going to either go as glucose in the bloodstream, going to go into muscles. It's going to help with protein degradation, protein synthesis, glucose utilization, and into the liver, and then from there we are going to go either as fat, so fat storage, or muscles. So pretty straightforward. It's going to either go one or the other, and it's going to depend on obviously what your activity level's like, what your metabolism's like, what's actually going on within your body. Because obviously to a certain extent, just doing day-to-day activities is going to utilize some of that as well. We're not saying that like when you're sitting still, you're not utilizing any of those stores at all. Generally at rest, you're utilizing a lot of fat stores too. So in terms of fear of carbohydrates, there is a big misconception that carbs make you fat, like I've said before, which is completely crazy to me because there is not one single macronutrient that's going to make you fat. At the end of the day, it's going to be an overstimulated diet. So what I mean by that is too many calories, simply put. So if you think about it this way, if carbs make you fat, specifically carbs, and you're telling me that you have a diet that's full of protein and fats, and that won't make you fat because carbs make you fat. So does that mean that I could eat, 3,000 calories or 4,000 calories of carbs and fat alone with no carbohydrates, and that I won't get fat off that, as opposed to eating 3,000 or 4,000 calories, including carbohydrates? You're trying to tell me that there is going to be a difference. That is an absolute load of crap. There is no scientific research behind it. There is really no science long-term in the sense that carbohydrates within your diet are going to have a detrimental effect on your health or your fat loss, depending on, obviously, I'm talking like if you have no serious medical conditions. Obviously, people with diabetes and other issues like that, any metabolic syndrome issues, carbohydrate processing for them is a little bit different, but I won't be getting into that today. I will leave that for another day. So I'm going to be talking about the average person when I am talking about carbohydrates today. So someone with no medical conditions, no prior histories, anything like that. So if you think about it that way, carbs do not make you fat. So if you're dieting and you're on 1,000 calories and it's really, really low, and I don't recommend anyone getting there, and you're looking at your macronutrient split and you're cutting out carbs, is there any need for that? Is that going to assist you with that last bit of fat loss if you manipulate, say, your fat intake and your carbohydrate intake? From the research out there and from what I've seen, obviously I haven't read every research paper, and just from the evidence that I've seen with, working with hundreds of clients, is that if you manipulate fat and carbohydrates, there is not going to be a massive difference in terms of fat loss. The other thing why it's so hard to get any good research about this is that if you're manipulating a variable, the two subjects in the study have to be exactly the same. So what I mean by that is if you're putting one person on a high fat, low carb diet and you're putting another person on a high carb, low fat diet, you need to make sure that they're on the exact same calories, that they're doing the exact same exercise, that they have the exact same body composition, and that they have the exact same hormonal profile. So you've got to look at it from that point of view, and any studies are going to be very hard. And this is why, as much as I am science-based, I'm also theory and practical-based, because at the same time, it's so hard to test some things in a controlled environment. So you really kind of have to go off what research says and then what also has been seen with clients, in non-clinical studies as well. And I think it was like Lane Norton and Paul Ravella and even Eric Elms, when they were in Perth, were having discussion about this. And some of it just comes down to what you've experienced with clients, and you'll see consistencies over time that come up. And unfortunately, you may get trolls saying, oh, well, there's no actual evidence behind that. Show me a research paper. And it's like, well, I can't, but I've just seen that in the last 50 women that I've worked with. And unfortunately, they're not in an actual clinical study, but from what we've done diet-wise, we can see that there's a clear correlation between, X and Y. So I think you have to look at it from that aspect and look at evidence in terms of, yes, science, but then also practicality and what commonly is coming up. Now, for me personally, when it comes to carbohydrates and fat loss, I do believe that the leaner you are, the easier it is for you to process carbohydrates. As also, I preface that by saying if you have a decent amount of muscle mass. If you are just skinny and not a lot of muscle, then probably not going to be the case as much. But generally speaking, often when the client does get leaner, they become, better at digesting and utilizing carbohydrates. Obviously, that's because they've got a higher amount of muscle mass, a lower body fat level, and the more muscle mass you have, the more efficient you are at obviously storing carbohydrates and utilizing them. You have more stores to actually store muscle glycogen and less to be used for adipose fat. So I think, again, that doesn't mean if you're severely overweight that you don't eat carbs. That is some of the stupidity going on out there. You still need them. They're still important. They're still going to help you with your workouts, help you train, help you get focused. And people forget that carbohydrates also help with muscle growth. So that's a big one as well. So a lot of, I find, going on to the next myth now, is often that people think that protein is the key player in terms of building muscle mass. Of course, protein has the biggest role. You're still probably going to put on a little bit of muscle eating a shitload of protein and low carbs, but you're probably going to have a better response when you actually throw a bit more carbs in there as well. So we need to understand that if you want to build more lean muscle, you're going to have to make sure you're eating enough carbs on a daily basis. And that means, making sure that when you're in a growing stage that you are increasing your carbohydrate intake, say if you've come off a deficit phase or something like that. And so obviously the number one role of carbs is to give us energy. And weightlifting is a massive form of exercise, and it will rely heavily on carbs as fuel along with ATP and many of those building blocks as well in terms of like creatine and that sort of thing too. So if you're trying to weightlift, weight train on just fat as a fuel or protein, the intensity of the workout will probably drop. And that's why people, when they're in the last few weeks of dieting and all of that, and maybe their carbs are getting a bit low, the intensity of that session actually begins to lower, and then it's very hard to progress. So that's one of the reasons that you'll actually struggle to put on muscle if you're on low carbs, is purely just from an energy point of view. you're going to have less intensity in your workout, which means less output, and that means less muscle damage. And muscle damage is obviously muscle growth. So when it comes to rebuilding and growing stronger, carbohydrates are going to be, a really amazing star in this process. So when you take in larger amounts of carbohydrates after an intense training session, you're going to give your body those raw materials it needs to really resaturate muscle glycogen stores. And that's the storage form of carbohydrates in muscle tissue that is again going to go on to fuel your next workout. And it was actually noted in the European Journal of Sports Science that when you combine carbohydrates with protein after exhaustive exercise, it will enhance protein balance and optimize glycogen repletion in the body. So not depletion, repletion. So we're obviously saying that post-workout is a really good time to have carbohydrates, which is something that I highly promote. There's been a lot of research on it. But the best time of day, if you are going to have your carbohydrates and you are a little worried about fat gain or whatever it is, then the best time for you to have them is definitely going to be post-workout. I'm not saying by any means don't have them the other meals of the day. I pretty much have carbs at every single meal of my day. I've never been one to cut carbs out specifically. But obviously I always have a larger amount. So then we're getting into nutrient timing and everything like that. So the best time of day to have your largest serve of carbohydrates is definitely going to be post-workout and even pre-workout to a certain extent. We want to make sure that you're fueled up. And then for me, this comes down to time of day that you're training. So I always ask my clients when I start working with them, do you train in the morning or do you train at night? Because if they're training in the morning, and they say like to go and train fasted, which I don't recommend at all, especially for resistance training. And I try to get my clients off doing that. Is definitely have a big carb meal the night before. So we want to make sure that your muscle glycogen levels are good when you go train in the morning, that you lift well, again, especially if you're in a growth phase. If you're dieting, I still tend to encourage them to have a bit of carbs in their meal the night before, and then generally have something the next morning. So then they might have a lot post-workout in the morning and then back the carbs off throughout the day and then just have that bump up again at night. Now, if you train in the evening, then wouldn't it make sense to have your carbs at nighttime? And a lot of people get really scared of that. I'm scared that if I eat carbs at night and then I go to sleep, I'm going to wake up and I'm fat. It doesn't work like that, okay? Simple science does not work like that. Your body doesn't go, I'm sleeping, that's the time when I put on fat. It's actually the opposite. So when you go to bed, you're obviously going to increase growth hormone, which has a positive response with, lean body composition and boosted testosterone levels, all of those sort of things. So you have to look at it from that point of view that there's positives when you go to sleep. So having carbs before bed is not going to have a negative effect. Also, a lot of carbs help with, your feel-good hormones. So serotonin. So if you're having carbs before bed, it may help you sleep. It will help you be more mindless, more rested, all of these sort of things. So that's why sometimes people talk about carb coma, because they get this kind of euphoric, like nice, energetic high after some types of carbohydrates, especially whole grains, have been proven to be really significant there, as well as fruit. So I often will say to my clients who have poor sleep, I want you to have some oats and some blueberries before bed. And that's a really simple one. And you'll find that their sleep may be improved doing that. Again, everyone's going to vary. But again, if you train in the evening, then just have a fair chunk of carbs post-workout. The only carbs I would avoid post-workout, if you are someone who struggles with sleep and you want to have a lot of carbs before you go to bed, is a high sugar intake. Obviously, sugar is going to have effect on blood glucose levels. You're going to get a spike and then a crash, and it's not going to be an even release of energy, and a little bit of a different process. So try to keep them pretty low GI carbs if you're someone that struggles with sleep. If you're not, then I wouldn't really worry too much about it. Having a bit of sugar before bed for you probably won't stimulate you and keep you awake. So I think there's a big misconception around time of day to have them. So don't feel like, okay, I've gone to sleep. So the other one is a lot of people won't have them at night, and then a lot of people won't have them in the morning, which is really funny to me because they're kind of the two times of the day that I more encourage clients to eat carbohydrates. So when you wake up in the morning, you've been in an overnight fast, so unintentionally fasted. So sleeping for, 6 to 10 hours, that would be nice, but sleeping for, at least 6-8 hours in that range. And then when you wake up, people think that if they keep eating, this is the logic, if you keep eating fats and protein and you don't ingest carbs, that your body is going to run predominantly on fat stores because your muscle glycogen would have been depleted overnight. Now, unless you're dieting, that probably isn't true. It takes like a fair chunk of exercise or activity or low calories to deplete muscle glycogen. If you're on a pretty normal caloric intake of carbs, say you're ingesting anywhere from, 150 to 400 grams, that's not going to just disappear overnight. It doesn't just get depleted like that and turned into fat. That's not how the body works. So if you're getting up and having, a breakfast like that, then there's no way that it's actually going to facilitate more efficient fat loss. But I do preface that by saying there are certain reasons why I will give clients less carbs in the AM for their first meal and more protein and fats. But it's more from a energy point of view. It's more from a fullness point of view when people are dieting. It's more for other reasons, but it's not specifically fat loss. So I think that's what people forget. There's, causation and correlation as well. And what you'll see is that a lot of the time when people are dieting or in the depths of a deficit, certain things will happen, like they may drop out carbs earlier in the day or in their first meal. They might increase their protein intake. They might, have less carbs at certain meals of the day, but then keep a lot of carbs around training. They may, all these different things that people might do, and you might think that they're little tricks for fat loss. A lot of the time, they're not for fat loss, and they're not why I give that to a client. It's not always for fat loss. It's for other reasons. So I might, when someone's dieting, increase their protein intake and drop their carbohydrates, not to do with fat loss, but more to do with the fact that protein is more filling. And when you are on low calories, what are you better off eating? The foods that are more filling. Protein requires also energy to be broken down within the body, so they're going to get a little bit of a thermogenic kick from that, whereas carbohydrates are very easy for the body to digest, break down, absorb, all of that. So same with fats. It's a pretty easy process for the body. So that's why I'll tend to bring protein up, drop fats and carbs down a little bit when someone is dieting. Again, you don't need to go crazy high with protein. I've seen some horrendous amounts, but we'll do a whole nother day on protein as well. But yeah, so it might be small adjustments like adding 5 or 10 grams of protein to a meal here or there and pulling down some carbs and fat. So your overall calories are maybe still within a deficit, but just a mild adjustment just to help the client with hunger, with all of those sort of things as well. Because you've got to think about the best diet has to be adhered to. And if you can't adhere to an ultra low carb diet and you end up going and then binging, you end up then going and overeating, there is no point being on a diet that low. And I think that that's a really important point to bring up for more my lifestyle clients. Obviously with a comp prep client, they have to do as they're told. But again, if I have a comp prep client and they're going over their carbs by, 50 grams a day, which is pretty significant. Say they're only on 100 grams and they're going over to 150, and that's happening daily, and they're going under, say, on fats and maybe under on protein, then I may need to address that with them and say, look, let's see what you're eating. Let's have a look at it. But, if you're just completely struggling to hit that 100 grams, which is still not that low, then, let's have a look at it. And it might be a case of just adjusting a few things. I might just show them some better ways to get protein in, but it also might be a case of me just bringing their carbs up a little bit to a happy medium. So I might bring it up to 120 or 125 and then bringing down some of the other nutrients to balance out. So it doesn't mean that we can all live on 500-600 grams of carbs a day. That would be lovely. But it does mean that you need to find a happy medium between something you can comply with and then also something that can get you results. I feel like for women, I don't really like dropping carbs too much under about 80-90 grams a day. I feel like anything under that is quite difficult to stick to. And then on the upper end, I feel like when I push any more than like 250, 300 grams for women I'm talking about, they find it quite hard to hit that upper end as well. Because I've got a lot of clients who are ectos, so very skinny body types. They struggle to put on muscle. And those girls, you really have to push some heavy carbohydrates in and heavy protein to get them to put on some mass. And it's difficult to eat sometimes. So sometimes they'll drink their carbs, we'll do liquid, we'll blend, we'll drink, anything like that will be handy as well. So you got to look at it from where you're attacking it. And if you're only eating 80 grams of carbs a day as opposed to someone having to hit 300 grams of carbs a day, you're going to be a lot more sparing in your carbohydrate choices. And that's a big one, I think. And going back to that diet point is that people think that eating quote unquote clean foods is the thing that gets you lean. when you're dieting, because I will tend to eat a lot more fruit and vegetables, definitely vegetables when I'm dieting. And it's not for the point of fat loss. Obviously, that you're going to get benefits from it. You're going to get probably a more efficient digestive system. You're going to have more antioxidants. You're probably going to feel better. But generally, if I'm not dieting, I'll eat more things like, occasionally have icy pole here and there, or I'll have some jelly beans as like my post-workout or pre-workout if I'm being lazy. And I won't have any qualms with doing that when I'm on 250, 300 grams of carbs a day, because it's such a small portion of it. But when you're only on like poverty macros, like 80, maybe 100 grams of carbs, which is still not that bad, you're not going to go waste 30 grams on like a 20 gram serve of, jelly beans or something. It's just not efficient. It won't fill you up and you'll be hungry later on. So that's why when you are dieting or on low calories, or someone with a bit of a slow metabolism and you're building your calories back up, it's really important to get your carbs from whole sources, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, things that are actually going to fill you up. Otherwise, you'll find that you will end up maybe binging or overeating or whatever it is. And that's a big one with clients when I look at like where their carbs actually coming from. I still believe that you can get the same or very similar fat loss results whether you eat jelly beans or whether you eat, bananas as your post-workout or veggies or whatever it is, because from a caloric point of view, it's the same. But from an overall satiety, energy, all of these other things that are really important when you're trying to lose fat, then we need to focus on that. And I think that's why the lines get blurred between what people think actually causes you to lose fat and what is actually more just, helping the dieting process by it being more sustainable, or by it being, more filling or satisfying or whatever it is. That we need to look at carbs in that sense. And that's how I look at manipulating foods for clients. There's obviously some research on things like carb cycling, dropping them down for a few days, then having high days or refeeds. And I really do use those principles with my clients. But again, we're not talking like dropping you down to 20, 30 grams for a few days and then cranking it right up again. I'm talking reducing it from maybe just below maintenance level and then bringing it back up. And that's a way, like we said before, depleting some muscle glycogen in the preface that hopefully our body will then begin to run a bit of fat. But we're doing that for a few days. We're not doing that just from like one overnight sleep if you're on high calories. So if you're in a deficit and you're going to use methods like carb cycling, then they work really, really well. But again, it's hard to find consistent evidence. So it's more just for me has been trial and error with clients, with myself. I find I get the best results that way. And so there's different ways of doing things. So I guess what I really need to go back to is obviously carbs and going back to insulin and everything like that. And I'm not going to go into, the depths of hormones or anything like that today. I'm really not going to touch insulin and sugar because I just think it's a topic that, oh my God, I could talk to someone on that for hours. So I might get an expert on for that. So again, I don't get trolled by people, but I might get on Lane or Paul or Eric or something for that one. So if you'd like to hear one more in depth about insulin and diabetes and carbs, then we'll definitely do a talk on that as well. But yes, there is so many variables in terms of carbohydrates that people fear. And if you're also not including carbohydrates in your diet, then you may be lacking, like I've said before, whole grains. You might be lacking B vitamins. B vitamins give you so much energy. You may be lacking satiety with your meals because you're not having a lot of fiber. So there's so many things that you are going to struggle to get if you don't have carbohydrates in your body. Now, one of the big things that irks me on a daily basis is when I'm chatting to someone or I see a post, and again, I wouldn't go troll it, but it just in my brain, I'm like, but when somebody says that they're on no carbs, and I'm like, how the fuck can you be on no carbs? It doesn't physically happen. So, or people say they're on ultra low carbs, and I'm like, oh, what carbs are you on? And they go, oh, I'm on 20 grams a day. And I was like, oh, does that include your vegetables? And they're like, no. So I was like, so you can eat whatever veggies you want, but that's not included in that 20 grams. And they're like, yep. Okay, well, what veggies are you eating? They're like, oh, I have a few serves of beans a day. I have some broccoli. I have some salads. I have, some carrots and bits and pieces. And I'm like, you're probably ingesting another 50, 60 grams of carbs there and you don't even realize it. So, and again, that's not a bad thing. I think that's great. They're eating more food and they're eating more calories than what they think. But at the same time, don't get confused with what carbs are. Carbs are in like so many things. Carbs are in almost everything besides obviously things that are pure protein. So like animal meat, eggs, even your whey protein is going to have some grams of carbs in there. And then even in terms of your dairy, there's going to be carbs in a lot of dairy unless it's pure fat. So things like butter, olive oil, coconut oil, all of that obviously don't have any carbohydrates in them, but your nuts are going to have carbohydrates in them. Your dairy, like I said before, all of these foods that people forget that there's carbs in. And again, carbs aren't the devil. I'd rather people be eating these, but they forget sometimes when they're tracking food that it's in a lot of foods. And that's something that when I've worked with people with, diabetes before, that we've had to kind of talk about and explain that it's not just as simple as carbs being like bread, pasta, fruit. I had someone once who they didn't realize that fruit was a carb. They thought that carbs were literally like white bread, rice, pasta, all those things. But carbs are in so many things within the body. And that's why your vegetables are very low in carbs and high in fiber, and why they're great for when you're dieting. And obviously there's different types of fiber as well, different types of carbohydrates, which we won't go fully into today as well. Starches, non-starches, high fiber, low fiber, fast digesting, slow digesting. And again, that all comes down to GI and GL, so glycemic load as well of the product. But that is definitely for another day. I will wrap up here talking about carbs. If you want to hear some more podcasts on carbs and want me to have some experts on, I'll be glad to talk about it. But basically, at the end of the day, summing it all up, don't fear them. Learn how to use them in your diet. Learn when the best times of day are to have them, maybe for your goals. If you're in a deficit, if you're someone that's in your off season or whatever, then, go nuts, eat some more carbs. Make sure you're having, again, a big bulk of them post-workout. If you're trying to build muscle and trying to recover, that would be my key tip. Like if you're an athlete, when I used to run, we would eat so many carbs and not gain weight. So it's an absolute myth, but obviously our energy output is very, very high. So you need to look at it from that sense. If you're sitting around on your butt all day and you're eating a lot of carbs and you're not active, then yeah, of course you're going to gain weight. And that's not just from the carbs, that's from the lack of output, and that's from overall caloric intake. Same thing if you sat around on your butt all day and ate fats, you're still going to put on fat. It's as simple as that. So don't try to overcomplicate it and think, oh, okay, I'm not training today, so I won't eat carbs, but I'll still, drop fat. You probably will if you say just drop carbs out, because your calories are going to come down overall, but it's not going to be due to the carbohydrates. It's just going to be due to the caloric drop. So at the end of the day, we need to come back to caloric output, caloric intake, and the relationship there, and understanding that the discrepancies between, protein, carbs, and fat and macronutrient breakdowns in your diet, they're going to play different roles for different reasons, but avoiding one whole food group is really not going to be the way to go, just in terms of from a fat loss point of view. That's not what you need to do. It's not necessary. It doesn't need to be that extreme. At the end of the day, it comes back to balance. It comes back to sustainability and what your goals are. So always look at those three. Look at what your goal is. Look at, is this type of dietary intervention sustainable? And is it also giving me energy, making me feel good, helping my sleep, helping all of those sort of lifestyle factors? So they're the big three you want to look at when you are coming into a dietary intervention. And if you're going to make a dietary change, I think you've got to also realize that it's going to be a little bit difficult. You're basically changing your habits, changing the way you eat, changing the way you nourish yourself. So you need to also understand that it won't be easy for the first few weeks when you're getting into it. But at the end of the day, just don't do anything extreme, don't do anything crazy. And if you're not sure, ask some professionals, get some advice, but don't fear carbs. Just learn how to use them. And if you're someone that is dieting and hearing this and you're living on protein and fats, also don't just go add carbs into your diet tomorrow, okay? Because you probably will put on fat. All right, why? You're increasing calories. But if you're going to go in and maybe pull some of your fats down and protein down and replace that with some carbohydrates in your diet so that you feel more energetic, you feel more vibrant, all of these sort of things, I highly, highly recommend it. But again, balance out your calories. You're not just adding calories, because then you will put on fat. So make sure you're looking at it from that point of view. Pull something out to put something back in. And I'll tend to do that as well if I'm struggling with, sticking to lower carbs, higher fats, whatever it is. So learn how to manipulate them and when to put them back into your diet. So I hope you enjoyed this 11th episode of the podcast. And if you want more on carbohydrates, more questions, fire them at me. Shoot me an email, alice@aliceround.com. And also, I am starting my new program, Breakthrough. We are starting that this week, but it is a really awesome program. I've put so much work into it. And the program has no defined start date, which is really cool. So you can kind of jump in if you want to be a part of it. We're going to have we will have start dates, but different points throughout the year. So rather than just having like everyone has to start on X date, that's difficult from a coaching point of view because we've got to make sure everyone's like, on track. We've got calls, all of that when you start. So I'm allowing people to kind of do the program throughout the year. So we'll probably have intakes at the start of each month, only like 4 or 5 people that we're going to be letting in every month to the system. And you get coaching with me, you get all of my resources, all of my websites, you get a new website that we've built for it specifically. It steps you through day by day through the whole program. And then you also get one-on-one with me, group support, we do Facebook Lives, all of that. It's pretty awesome. And it's all about breaking through all of this bullshit, so getting more educated. It's about losing fat in a healthy way. It's about body recomposition. So many things. It's got training in there as well. It covers training, nutrition, mindset, the whole deal. And that's why I called it Breakthrough, much like the podcast, because that is my mission in life, to get women to break through and, get rid of all this bullshit that's out there and start getting really educated and empowered from that education. So I will stop rambling. Hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I'll see you in the next. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Breakthrough the Bullshit. And I would just like to say, if you want to get any further coaching assistance or get in contact with me, you can shoot me an email, alice@aliceround.com, or jump on my website, which is the same. And then also, if you have any questions about the program I'm running, you can submit it through there. Thank you again for being a part of it. I'd really appreciate it if you can give us a review on iTunes and or on YouTube. Give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so that I can keep providing you with more and more awesome content, and pumped to have you in the next one. Have a great day.